Mm.
Culture is not like building a house. You don't need to level the ground to build this thing up. Culture is more like it's like you're working in a garden. It's like, well, what's good here? There's actually some great stuff here. You gotta tend to that, cultivate that, and then pull out some of the weeds there. But, so it's not this leveling. It's a lot more organic than people tend to think.
Welcome to Game Changers, Athlete Edition. I'm Kortney Harmon, a former Division I softball pitcher turned high-performance business coach who knows what it takes to translate athletic mindset into real-world success.
And I'm Julie Jones, a Hall of Famer and former Division I head coach with more than 20 years of experience turned mental performance coach. Together, we bridge the gap between elite athletics and lifelong achievement, helping you unlock your full potential on and off the field. This podcast is your go-to source for inspiration, motivation, amazing guests, and actionable insights to help you elevate your game.
Welcome back to another episode of Game Changers Athlete Edition. And today, Julie and I are thrilled to welcome a true game changer in the sports leadership team culture arena. JP Nurbin is not only a best-selling author, a leadership coach, a founder of TOC Culture Consulting, a leading global sports consulting and leadership business coach. And what I've heard, this is my first conversation with JP, but his impressive work has spanned across sports, education, healthcare, business, guiding leaders at prestigious institutions like Stanford, Harvard, University of Texas, USGA, PwC, and Chick-fil-A. That was a new one I learned today. JP has also authored two groundbreaking books called Calling Up Discovery, Your Journey to Transformational Leadership, and The Culture System, a proven process in creating extraordinary team cultures. JP has been highly recommended by Julie for her experience and with coaching and also joining a class that she's coaching. So I'm super excited today that we're going to be deep diving into JP's expertise on building winning team cultures, transformational leadership, how students can really take culture into their own hands to help lead their teams, and parents can best support their young athletes going in this way. So, JP, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to chat with Julie and I.
Hi, I'm excited to be here. This is going to be a fun one, and I've enjoyed the last time I got to speak with Julie in her class. It was, that was actually gave me a lot of hope being with those students. So I'm excited for today's conversation as well.
Right, Kortney, you talk about all of the outstanding institutions. We have to add in the University of Akron because we're using his book.
There we go.
Right, we're using his book in my positive team culture class, which is what got us connected. However, I had been a fan and follower of his podcast, which has been. I wish I would have had more access to that when I was coaching. I also do want to add before we get started, JP also wrote the Sport Parent Solution: Proven Strategies for Transforming Parents into from Obstacles into Allies. And we'll be talking a little bit about that in our next episode. But JP, I'm excited to be here. I told you before we started to record that you had a great impact on our students at Akron. And from that experience, I thought this would be a great time to share some of your expertise in culture building, but in a little different lens. Your book, The Culture System, is written for coaches or leaders, and it's a system that leaders can take and implement and help build a better performing culture. The other side of that is the people that we're building culture with instead of for, right? So I thought it would be awesome to discuss some of the things that you have in that system, but from the lens of an athlete. How can athletes help better their culture? How can athletes build culture? How can athletes manage or perpetuate outstanding cultures and manage cultures that are a little bit maybe dysfunctional? So those are a lot of questions, but let's just start wherever you want to with what is the athlete's role in team culture?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a lot of things you could say that they can do, but it all would start from this one place, which I'll give you. The first thing I'll give you is just that athletes is the same I would give to a coach, which is your own example, how you show up in that environment. And so often people, whether that be a head coach or a captain or a star player, or whatever it be, people, when things, are positive, they're upbeat, they really embody the things that they value until it gets really hard, until others around them turn negative.
Right.
And oftentimes, people might say, well, they hold on, and they kind of come the last line of defense, but eventually they break down. And it's just, there is an aspect of leadership, whether you're the head coach or a player within a team, that could use, this resilience to stay true to your values, regardless of how other people, your losing streak or whatever is going on in your environment. So there's many things to do with even in just that process itself, which is to know what do you value, to know who you want to be, who are you when you're at your best. And then it's about going and being that every day.
That's the hard part. The one quote from your book, and it's not an exact quote, but you were talking, our coach was talking, it might've been the soccer coach, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that culture, but they were saying, when is it hardest to stick to your values, or when is it hardest to maintain your culture? And this was the question in our class all semester long, is everything's great. And as John Madden says, winning is a great deodorant. It covers up all the stinky stuff. I don't know if that's exactly what he said, but very close. But how do you stick to these things when things aren't going the way you want? Because you can have, as you say, you can have things placard everywhere, but if we don't live them, they don't exist.
Well, first off, for whatever is placard, that it's truly authentic to you. I think a lot of times leaders take, like Kobe Bryant, Mamba mentality. That's what I'm about. No, that was Kobe. That wasn't you. So you have to really know whatever is placard, whatever you put on your your t-shirt, whatever you put on your shoes, whatever you put on your, these little artifacts that we like to have, these little videos that we like to listen to, or right. Like, do we have these mantras, these beliefs, these values that are truly ours? That's the first really important piece in that. Then there comes down to making sure that we have certain practices within our lives, wellness, that we take care of ourselves so that we can respond well to stress and adversity. So, these are the obvious things, but like it's, nutrition and sleeping right and, those types of things that are really important. Phone usage, just being aware of how that affects you. So just your own mental, emotional well-being is really important that you take care of that, because if you don't take care of yourself, then the window of tolerance for stress and adversity becomes much smaller. Yes. So that's a big piece of it. And then on top of that, it can be really helpful to have what I would say mindfulness practices that help you to be reflective. So like mindfulness meditation and journaling, as well as Dr. Michael Gervais would say, conversations with people of wisdom, mentors or coaches that hold up a mirror that help you to be self-reflective of, ooh, I'm a little bit off track here, and help pull me back into track. Reading books on leadership, performance, development, mental strength, mental resilience, just in listening to good people as well too. Like those are a plethora of ideas, but I think you need to be marinating in that type of stuff. I think it helps you to stay true. And also it's not like you have this moment of like this day or this week or this single moment that you get clarity on who you are and who you are at your best. It's a kind of, these things are a process. They're constantly happening. You're constantly understanding, okay, who am I? What do I value? What's most important to me? As you go through this experience of, learning and mindfulness and working on yourself.
It's interesting. You say, oh, go ahead, Kortney. I'll let you go.
Sorry, I'm not as strong with my voice right now. JP, you just mentioned a lot of wonderful things as an individual to do outside of their team that will influence. Right now, firsthand this year, I've seen a lot of teams struggle. And I'm going to look at this like I interview business leaders on my other podcast, and the percentage of athletes that are business leaders, that 69 to 95% that hold leadership roles in these businesses. I almost want to take that back down to the education level or the team level. How do they influence the culture of the whole team, or a bad coach, or they're taking that individually, but that one person can really steer the team in a different direction. But how do they, oftentimes we get in those situations with maybe a bad coach or a really toxic team, but in the idea of how do I take that to change the trajectory, almost like managing up for our businesses?
Yeah, I think there is two really big things in this. A lot of times we get overwhelmed by the current state of the culture. It feels toxic. It feels negative. It's low performing. And so where we instantly go to, and it's a great place to go to, is the behaviors. You got to lead by example. Like, are you the hardest working person on your team? Are you the most positive person on your team? Right? Like, just being that person that's positive, that's hardworking, that has a great attitude, that's grateful to be out there, no matter the circumstances. Like, that itself is really important. So lead by example, and no matter the circumstances. Like, that's real tough, but it's really important to do. However, outside of leading by example, I would say it would be around the stories, the mindsets, the beliefs that people have.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you help others to reframe? How can you help others to shift their mindset? Because our thinking drives our behaviors, and our behaviors drive our results. And so as a leader, when you hear other people go negative, how do you help them go positive? How can you reframe that, right? You have a big loss and it's frustrating. I was working with an athlete the other day, and I said, hey, how'd you feel about your performance? And the coaches would have been a bit down on his performance, and other people would have said, he didn't perform. He's like the star on the team. And he said, yeah, but I know I didn't get the results I wanted, but I was so close on these couple goals, and it just had gone a little bit more to the left or right here. We wouldn't be talking about a negative performance. We'd be talking about how amazing I played. Like, he just knew, like, he had everything in perspective. His way of framing that was great. Well, what happens the next game? He goes out and scores 2 goals, right? Like, has this amazing game, right? So, but how could he do that for other people, right? So he has a great mindset. He's a good lead by example, but how can he help his teammate who's really down on himself remind him of that? Or the team in the huddle, remind them of that? Because at the end of the day, you as a leader, whether you're the head coach or you're a captain or star player or anybody out there, you can help people frame the narrative.
Yeah, I love that.
You said in the book, you talked about the comedian who changed his performance by changing his perspective. Will you tell us a little bit about that story and why that's so important for athletes to understand that mindset?
Yeah, so the comedian Michael Jr., who's a very successful comedian, he had a really big day. He was appearing on the Leno show, I think, like 15, 20 years ago. And up until this point, every time he stepped on stage, it was like, how can I get people to laugh? How can I get people to laugh? So everything was about getting people to laugh. And then one day he had this experience after the Leno show, I believe, and he saw this homeless person outside when he was walking out, and he thought about giving. Like, how could I give people the opportunity to laugh? And so he started actually doing a lot of comedy shows in areas where people were coming from really tough situations, whether it be prisons, homeless shelters, or homes with orphans, right? Orphanages. So he just changed his mindset. Now, it changed what he did in the sense of where he obviously did comedy, still does comedy in big arenas and big shows. But everything, what really changed for him was like his mindset. He went from how do I get to how do I give? And that came from a place of abundance, a place of gratitude. And so I tell that story because it really talks about how the importance of mindset within a leader. And so I think, oftentimes we fall into traps of having an entitled mindset. Well, they're lucky to have me, or I should get this because I'm great, or that. Instead of gratitude, I'm grateful. I'm lucky to be here. I'm fortunate. I get to do this. I get to practice. I get to play. I get to be a part of this team, right? So it could be shifting from that. It can be shifting from an inward to an outward mindset, as the Arbinger Institute talks about, which is, hey, I see people as obstacles, vehicles, or irrelevant to my success, to, hey, I see people as people. I see the person, and they're just as important as me. So there's a lot of different mindsets you could tap into, but it ties into this thing what we were just talking about there, which is just how much our thinking, our mindsets drive our behaviors. And so a lot of times people focus, well, what do great leaders do? Rather than think about what do great leaders do, think about what do great leaders, how do they think?
Right.
How do they think about things? How do they see other people?
It's awesome that you just brought up the outward mindset. I actually have 2 slides that I was going to talk to you about from the book that I use in some of my team sessions about, current results and then behaviors. Protecting and advancing oneself leads to an inward mindset. And then, an outward mindset is the advancement, the collective result, looking at what we can do for others, either blaming or taking accountability, all those different things. But I thought that story was so important when we think about what am I trying to get compared to what am I trying to give. And that makes a huge difference in culture. I listened to, you probably have listened to it as well, The School of Greatness with Lewis Howes. And I remember one time he was talking about his fear of public speaking, and his speech coach, his public speaking coach, said, when you walk out there, think about how you're going to help them instead of yourself. Right? Get into them. I always tell our teams that I work with, get out of your head and into somebody else. And I think that is such a big lesson for athletes, because the outward culture doesn't really tell them that. Do you agree that that's a challenge?
Yeah, I just actually, before we hopped on this call to record this podcast, I was coaching an athlete who was just coming out of an injury, was not likely to be in the starting lineup this coming weekend, and was very aware, but to her credit, very aware that she could easily fall into a selfish mindset. Mm-hmm. And so I asked her, I said, well, what would be the worst thing for you to be selfish on the sidelines if you weren't playing on Sunday? And they're in a big final national championship cup game. And she said, that would be more excluded, and I wouldn't be helping the team to win. That would be actually the worst thing. And so she was able to come to this awareness of how that doesn't serve her, it doesn't serve the team, right? And that setting. So she has to be able to make a shift. And it's a hard shift because she's always been on the field. She's one of the better players in the country. She's, and so this is a new experience for her, have to sit on the sidelines. But it was, for her, it's about how this conclusion she came to was, okay, the best thing that I can do is just focus on being the best me. What does that look like if I'm playing and training? That's going to help push my teammates. And then whether I'm playing or not, what's the best me? What other parts of my identity, my personality bring value outside of just kicking this ball and scoring goals? So this individual had to identify that. And so I think when it comes to this selfless mindset, moving into that outward mindset, it's trying to understand how we provide value, how we help others in the world outside of just scoring our performance. Just like Michael Jr., okay, it wasn't just about, going out there and getting people to laugh. It's like, what does it actually mean to give them the opportunity to laugh? What does it actually do for them? How does it actually help them to shift? It's not just entertainment on a Friday night. It actually was really significant and meaningful to these orphans, to these homeless people. Oh, people care about me, right? Right. You're doing much more than just comedy.
Absolutely. One other thing you mentioned a few minutes ago, you're talking about stories. How can we change the story? We know that we are very good storytellers in our own head, and we make things a little bigger than they normally are at times. I'm sure Kortney had lots of stories about me when she was on the team, and they weren't all good. I am certain of that. But here we are today, see, because the stories weren't all true. But another thing you talk about in the book, and this is something that there's tons of research on, but you talk about complaining and how complaining affects things. You've probably read John Gordon's book with Mike Smith about it starts in the locker room you win in the locker room first. And they had a no complaining rule on the Atlanta Falcons when Mike Smith was the coach. Talk a little bit about complaining, what it does to teams. And that's maybe one way athletes can help adjust as well, as to, you talk about, moving things from negative to positive, but I don't know if people really think of complaining as negative all the time, or doesn't make them feel negative.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing from a leadership perspective. We want people to be honest. We want people to share their frustrations. And when does that become unhealthy, right? Mm-hmm. When does it become complaining, right? And complaining is sharing a frustration, a belief around ways that things aren't the way they should be, and but being unwilling or not really necessarily taking any steps to change that. And so I think as a leader, you want to provide, a lot of times within teams that I work with, they do like leadership groups, when there is a selected group of leadership captains or leaders that run groups where they look after 4 or 5 people oftentimes. And one of the things that they're responsible for is checking in with them and what's going on for them. And is there any frustrations or challenges? And that could seem like, well, that leader's encouraging them to complain. No, it's, hey, there's a frustration, there's a challenge, there's an issue. Bring it let's air it so that I can help you solve for that. How we can all work together to solve this issue, this challenge that's facing the team, or it's facing this individual, where they don't feel like they're getting a fair chance, or they don't feel like they're getting enough feedback, or, whatever it be. And so the idea is, yeah, we want honesty, we want communication in our environment so we can work towards solutions. But it becomes complaining when we're not really taking any action and we're just venting and our frustrations. And that creates negative stories within the groups. And that understory, that story within the group, that really start to shift a culture very quickly, because it's very contagious.
I want to expound on that a little bit more. Obviously, we talked about your coaching culture podcast, which we will link in our show notes. Ideally addressing the team culture, but like you just mentioned, one thing that could be a common culture building mistake. I want to know what the most common, or like the 3 top culture building mistakes you see teams or athletes make. Give me 3.
Yeah, I think that's probably like really close to the top from players, which is to hear people out and letting them vent. And hey, some people just need a vent, and then that's it, right? Like, there's validating what people feel, but then you have to help them move beyond that. Okay, so what can we do about it? What options do we have? What choices do we have here? That would be a really, really big one. I think from a player's perspective. I think from a player's perspective would be sitting back and just expecting the coach to really drive the culture. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, now more than ever, the research would show with this generation of athletes, Gen Z, that Gen Z cares more about peer recognition than even coach recognition. Than maybe, like that dynamic shifted. And so you as a teammate, you can organize things. You can, and honestly, those are the best things. Got a college team here in Ireland where I live, high-level national championship team. They had a tradition on every Wednesday after practice, tea and chats. Everybody is expected to come over and have tea and biscuits, and biscuits are like cookies over here in Ireland, but just a different name for it. And they have tea and they just sit around and chat for 30, 45 minutes after practice. And this is a way to to connect, right? Just a simple tradition, right? So little simple traditions, don't ever underestimate how just bringing everybody together within your team can move the culture forward. We all want to go on the big team paintballing thing or this, all that stuff. Like, no, just like simple little traditions, inviting everybody for coffee where everyone's invited, or whatever it be within your team. Like that goes a long, long way. I would say that would be kind of the second one, is that we just underestimate the impact of those types of things, as well as then underestimate the impacts of little behaviors and encouraging those behaviors, like getting everybody to practice on time. To, if you're a basketball team or football team, hey, let's all do a little bit of extra work here to start off with. Like, we're here early, let's partner up and let's do these. Like, just bringing intentionality. Like, it could be that it's just starting little behavioral traditions within your sport as well. I think helps to drive performance. So if you're going to the gym on a Saturday and it's an off day for a recovery session, or, for, those types of things, great. Are you inviting other people with you? Are you going in for extra skill work, or you showing up early and you working intentionally, right? It's great. Lead by example, but make sure you invite other people, because a lot of times people don't actually know that they're welcome.
In those three, you started to talk about behaviors. And one of the things in the book that you talk about for leaders that is necessary when you're building culture is establishing your non-negotiables. Can you talk about that from an athlete's perspective and how that might be important to their ability to help maintain culture and to improve their performance?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, your non-negotiables answer the question, what do I need to be successful? What do I need to be successful? And I think it's an important question to reflect on, as from an athlete perspective. Like, what do I need from my coaches? But even just flip that around and ask your coaches, like, hey, coach, what do you need from me? And what do you need from all of us for you to be as successful and as effective as a leader as possible? Right? Just start from a place of asking your coach that. That might be a really powerful thing that really shows that you care, that you're interested in helping support them. So if you have that's a really, really great question to ask. I do a lot of coaching in the corporate space as well too. And people are having to lead up the chain of command, and they might experience some frustrations with their boss. That's the same question I'd say, hey, go to your boss and say, hey, what do you need from me to help you be successful in your role? And so asking that, hearing 3, 4, 5 things that your coach says would be really grateful or good to hear. And then turning back around and being able to tell the team, maybe your coach, and like, hey, like, these are the things that we really need. If I'm going to be successful, if you're going to be successful, like, we all need to be, making sure that we're on time, that we're getting, proper recovery, and that we're spending time to get off the field or the court or whatever it be. Like, I just think at the end of the day, you're trying to figure out, what do I need? And so it's important to know those things as well too, because as a lot of times athletes go through the recruitment process, or selecting a team, or selecting a coach, selecting an environment, is like, are you choosing the environment for you to be successful? Or are you just picking the one with the coolest locker rooms, or the biggest NIL deal, or whatever it be, like, or the most popular? Like, are you actually going to be successful there? Is that type of coaching going to help you be successful? Is that environment going to help you to be successful? So I think that would be something too, just even selecting the team you play on.
You just mentioned some other things to think about. Besides, obviously, coaches and players, who else shapes team culture? And how do we include them more? Obviously, parents are a big part, peers are a big part, but talk to me, like, how do we get all of them on board, and not just think about the surface level things, or the most people that are front and center on this journey?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you just bring in the idea of, like, well, other people are part of this, because other people are, I actually genuinely think that how a team treats, and when I say this, like, that, for lack of a better term, like the lowest person, like the equipment manager to, the janitor, like, I think how the leader treats those people says so much about the culture. And I think it's the same within how a leader interacts with parents, right? At the end of the day, I do a lot of work with coaches. Parents have become a big part of it. of the sporting culture, but it seems like coaches tend to build walls again with trying to keep parents out rather than to engage them. And so I mean, I think it's about, we recognize that athletes need the support of, obviously their community, they need the support of their coaches, and they need support from their parents as well. The parents are the biggest influence in their lives. So the more we can get those all working together, the better. And I think that, so I'm a huge advocate for coaches to engage the parents, bring them in there. I also think that players have a bit of a responsibility in that too. They can be really helpful in communicating what they need from their parents to be successful. I think that, and one of those is to not harass our coach or whatever it be, it'd be something like that, but just really like, hey, what do I need from you from my parents to be successful in my role, and communicating to that and get on the same page of that would be a real positive for sure.
I have a example of that I just witnessed this weekend. So one of my former players and one of Kortney's former coaches as well is the head coach at Cleveland State University in softball. The assistant coach played for me too, but at Akron. They just cut the program. So this was their last weekend. They played in the conference tournament. I was there for the very last Cleveland State softball game. And when I went out onto the field afterwards, after they did all their crying and hugging and all the things that you would do after your program is being cut and your season is over, I was standing talking with Coach Kyler. And the first person that she introduced me to was the grounds guy. Because this guy was one of her closest allies. And that lots of programs, I'm sure, treat their grounds crew the way that they should be, because they're very, very important. But to me, that was very significant. They have a very close relationship. She is very good to him. And she, she has the kids thank him and all, just like we used to have Thankful Thursdays, thank the people around you that make this program possible. But in that moment, I just thought I was so proud of her, because I know how she treats the people that work for the program or work with the program. Another example, that I was there for a swim meet for my son, and one of the custodial staff people that was there on a Saturday comes in with a Cleveland State softball shirt. And I literally had tears in my eyes. So I thought Kyler gave that to her because she knows how important she is to the program. Like as a coach, you're like beaming with pride when you see these things, when your former players are, doing exactly what you said, because everyone in the culture matters. And the more people that you treat with respect, the more respect is given, no doubt.
Can I just comment on that real quick?
Absolutely.
Things, and this is, it's really, really important. If you are a head coach or you're a captain, you're a leader in a team, there's going to be people on the end of that bench that don't play minutes. Mm-hmm. But does their contribution matter? Right? Does it matter? Absolutely it does. You need them to push you in practice and all that, right? So it 100% does matter. And what a great way to signify that they matter, that everyone matters, by treating the groundskeeper, the janitor, the whoever with the same respect that you treat the star player with. Like everyone's treated with respect. It just makes everyone feel valued. But if we go around and we say, well, we're going to give this much person this much attention, this much respect based upon what I feel their contribution is, that creates a culture where players will not feel valued if they're not on the court or on the field playing.
Absolutely. Our administrative assistant was the most important person in the office, because as Kortney knows, I don't know how to do technology or like major spreadsheets. And if I didn't have her, I would have wasted tons of time, because my assistants were horrible at it too. So, everyone brings value, because everyone can do something better than you can, quite frankly, because everybody has a gift that you don't. And I think that's such an important thing for athletes to remember, mainly because they come from, so many have such a sort of egocentric outlook, and they don't even know that they're doing it that way. That's just because their individual coach tells them this is what you, and then we move into a team setting, and that doesn't work. So, this display for a captain or a coach can be so valuable to say, oh my gosh, observe the landscape and see what other people are doing. And maybe, maybe collectively we could be really awesome together. I think that's so important. Another thing you talked about in the book, and this is, I think, a great tool for athletes. You talk about stop, start, continue, or stop, start, sustain, whatever the terms are that those of us that do this use. Tell us a little bit about why thinking about what you need to start doing or stop doing or continue doing can be so important for a leader in their culture.
Yeah, I think at any stage, first it's about like, what are we going to keep doing? What are we going to sustain? And I think we always want to go to what's not working, what's going wrong, or what do we need to change? And if you do that, I mean, if you create a list of 100 things, you're still missing another 100 things, right? So it's a great thing to start from a place of what's working, what's going well, what do we need to make sure we keep doing here, and starting from that place. And then the stop, like you stop is really important, because if you want to start doing something, you got to stop doing something, right? Like add something. So and also just certain behaviors that might be negative that bring down the culture. Those would be really key to identify, so you could remove those things. And then, yeah, it's obviously you've got to do some things to get better, but typically when I have teams do those reviews, I really like to challenge them to come up with one per category. Like, if you can only really offer one thing here, what's the most important thing from your perspective? Because there's no sense in adding a list of even 5 things you got to stop and 10 things you got to start doing. You just can't do it all. So it's just less is more.
You use an example in the book of the fire prevention organization that you talked about. They had 3 or 4 things that were important that they needed to do, and they made the list of 50 or so, and then it made it a lot more difficult to do anything. And I think that's our one of our faults as humans is first of all, I don't know where I just went. Did I leave?
You're back.
Okay, good. Okay, because everything just went black for a second. Is that when we think we need to make change, we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, and we don't think about what we need to continue, because there's always something in there that needs to maintain. All right, and then figuring out one thing that we can tackle. I just read something the other day that said, if something seems hard, it's because the first step isn't small enough. And one thing, you talk about Toyota and that, Kaizen 1% better, those kinds of things make such a big difference. Absolutely.
I love it.
Yeah, no, I love that line there. If the first step should be simple, 100%. And I mean, I think we do tend to overcomplicate things, and culture is not like building a house. You don't need to level the ground to build this thing up. Culture is more like, it's like you're working in a garden. It's like, well, what's good here? There's actually some great stuff here. You gotta tend to that, cultivate that, and then pull out some of the weeds there. So it's not this leveling. It's a lot more organic than people tend to think.
That's such a great analogy. You talk about using different tools in a garden, and in your analogy in the book, and I thought I really resonated with that as well. There's a lot to it. And a person told me, they said, if you don't keep your eye on your culture, somebody else will. And that goes to show how much power an athlete can have in a culture. They can affect culture. I think we try to say, not my job. But if you really want to be in an organization that thrives, it is really your job. It's every single person's job. And helping people see their role in it could be the most important thing you do on a team. Absolutely. Yeah, it's so important. Something that I don't think it's talked about enough with athletes from their perspective. So I appreciate the thoughts on this.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Game Changers Athlete Edition. So excited to continue this conversation with JP Nurbin next week. This week, we talked about the athlete's perspective on how they can affect culture. Next week, we're going to talk about how parents impact that same result of culture with their athletes. So don't forget to tune in 2 weeks for that next episode. Thanks so much for joining us on Game Changers Athlete Edition. Remember, champions aren't born. They're built through dedication, perseverance, and the right mindset. If you found value in today's episode, share it with a teammate, with a coach, or someone who could benefit from this conversation. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcast and follow us on social media for exclusive content and daily motivation. Until next time, keep pushing your limits and stay focused on becoming the game changer you're meant to be.